onboarding new developers, like external freelancers and contractors, and onboarding juniors. And then we had like different issues with people being on Linux or some people being on Windows, which had issues when the actual VM broke, because then you had different ways of fixing that per platform. So we started
Mhm.
looking at Docker, um, but obviously Docker Compose can be quite complicated.
Mhm.
So these tools like Lando and DDev, which I'll mention later in my talk, came about to sort of simplify that setup.
Mhm. And for other developers, I don't want to spoil too much out there, but for other developers out there, why would someone consider an alternative at all? Like, why not just go with what everyone else is using, what's established?
Um, I do think these tools are quite established in their own respective fields. I know, for example, DDev, an alternative to Docker,
Mhm.
to Lando, is quite established in the PHP community. But the reason you might want to look at something like Lando and consider it for your workplace or for your own personal workflow is just to speed up the setup. If you want to get up on a local site really quickly, be it WordPress, Drupal, Laravel,
Mhm.
Node.js, Python, and many others, you can do it in like 5 minutes. You don't really need to
Wow.
learn a lot of boilerplate.
Wow. Well, I'm looking forward to finding out how that works. 5 minutes sounds like a good promise. All
Uh,
right, Paul. We're going to let you have the stage to yourself. Please wow us with Lando.
awesome. So yeah, this is my presentation. I've tried to do it in Figma. I hope uh, it's fine for you guys. I just wanted to try something different than a normal PowerPoint. In the Discord discussion chat, I shared the prototype, which you can click to show you anywhere. You can actually click and navigate. You can drag up and down, and you can drag left and right to go through the panels. But I'm going to be going through it manually. So yeah, welcome to Faster Local Development with Lando. We're going to have a look at what Lando is, your use cases, how you actually use it, running commands with Lando, what they call recipes, and this is sort of their provided out of the box boilerplate code. We're going to look at an example setup with Strappy, have a look at how the networking, tooling, and how all of that could integrate into a real site where you have a Node.js Strappy CMS site on the back end and the Next.js front end. We're going to add a custom image for any images not supported by Lando. And I'll get into that side of things later. Then we're just going to have a little overview of architecture and how you might implement it in different setups for your workplace. And then I just want to explain how all of this actually improves your productivity and looking at alternatives and use cases where Lando might not be the best. And then at the end, if we have any time, we'll go through questions. But I'll be in the Discord after to answer any questions, of course. Right, so let's get started. What is Lando? It's a local development tool based on Docker. Some people might call it a Docker wrapper, but it does do a lot more than that. It handles routing, ports, containers, and it sort of shows the strengths and weaknesses of Docker. Emphasis on the weaknesses because Docker does have performance issues on macOS and a bit on Windows, although with WSL2, that's less of a problem now. Um, so yeah, we can see it wraps around Docker. In terms of use cases, if you need a variation, if you're working with a variety of skill levels in your development team, I found Lando quite an easy one to onboard junior developers onto because it allows you, by having a boilerplate code, it allows you to write all your documentation with a specific set of assumptions, including the development environment they're going to be working on per project. It allows you to have consistent workflows for each local development environment. That's a strength of Docker. So your technology stack, your Node versions, your PHP versions all remain the same, regardless of what each person, regardless of what platform each person is using. Um, and yeah, it supports out of the box. It supports all of these and quite a few more. So I've listed some languages, some SQL. I guess I don't know what you call them, SQL databases, and some CMSs and frameworks. And that's because Lando does make some assumptions to help you get started. Right, so using Lando, this is going to be your configuration file. And it looks complicated, but that's because it's a custom configuration file. But all you really need is a name and then possibly a recipe to get started with. And I'm going to show you that later. But for now, we're going to have the name, and this is the name of your project, and this is what your containers are going to have their naming convention based on. You then have a proxy, and this allows you to route your containers to pretty URLs. So we're going to see how we can access our node environment going on this port, and on this port on separate. It actually should be two different numbers, but they're going to be accessed through a different pretty URL. And this is sort of how you mimicking how you'd actually access a browser, a site on your browser, as if it were in production. Then we define our services, and this is essentially what software you actually need to run it, using the images provided by Lando, but you can add your own custom image as well, as we've done here to integrate Search. And I'll explain these technologies as well when we get into it. Then we have some tooling, and these are the sort of commands you want to expose to the actual end user of the Lando project. So for my developers, I would set up a drop database command, and this would take the Postgres SQL database and drop it, and they just need to run one simple command. And if anything changes in this, I can go and fix it, and they don't need to worry about what commands to run in which order. And the same goes for like user spaces and which services to run these commands in. It's all handled for us by Lando. Right, so getting into it, running Lando commands, all commands are appended by Lando. So Lando start, Lando help, Lando destroy, and all of these are the sort of most common commands you will use, with init running you through a interactive setup. So if you want to, it's going to ask you for what code base you want to use. If you want to set up any recipes, and I'll show you what those are in a bit. But this should help you simplify some of the initial process as well. Lando help is going to show you all the available commands, including any custom commands we've specified. And well, the rest are just sort of managing the containers. So start, stop, rebuild. We'll rebuild some of your containers while maintaining databases. And Lando destroy just completely destroys all your images and containers, similar to the equivalent in Docker. Yeah, so recipes. If I wanted to set up a Drupal site, all I'd really have to do is set my name, my site. So that's my site name, and then a recipe. And these are pre-configurations that the team at Lando have set up. And if you're not happy with those pre-configurations, you can then open a config object and set your configuration. And this is where you can change your PHP versions, set your specific database versions. Some of them may use MySQL. You may want PostgreSQL as a default. And they have quite a few recipes. These are just some of the PHP and popular ones. They have some for sort of older CMSs as well. And there's quite a few more. Yeah, it's worth having a look. I've linked here when you go through different headings. Hopefully you can see, but I've linked to the section in the docs. So if you're browsing this in the prototype, you should be able to just open a link to the docs where it explains more about each of these topics. Right, an example setup. So I'm just going to show you Strappy real quick. And Strappy is a CMS running, it's a headless CMS running on Node. And here I have some of my content, so some articles, title and a description, and it's all going to be consumed through an API. I took some screenshots in case the live demo doesn't work, but hopefully, yes, it does work. So from my API, I'm saying get the articles. I should zoom in, maybe. So from my API, I am getting the articles, and this is a list of articles that we're going to deploy on our Next.js site. Back to here. To show you the configuration. So this is the same configuration file I showed you earlier. We have a service node, and we're saying we want node 14, just the latest LTS when I set up this project. And then I say I want to expose these ports, and these are saying from my local machine, so this port here, I want to set up I think this is the way it goes. From my local machine, I want to set up the internal port. I want to expose these ports together so that I can access my app through the Docker network. And the same, I want to expose a second port, so the second one we'll use for Next.js. And then I can set up a build step. And so when this service is brought up, so when I do Lando start for the first time, it will cd into the API folder, which is here, and run a yarn install. And this will set up all the dependencies for our Strappy Node.js project. Now, of course, you can also run run commands. So if you want to have a command like yarn start, you can have it run when the container is brought up every time. So that automatically brings it up. But I'm not doing that. What I've done so far, all I've done so far is run Lando start. And then, so you can see currently the URLs are showing red because at the time that this site was brought up, Lando couldn't reach these URLs. But then in my API, I just came in and ran Lando yarn dev, and this runs yarn dev or develop inside the Lando container for it. And that's where the mapping is. So here I'm saying under my tooling, I'm saying run yarn in the service node. Equally, I could set up a separate command for yarn, say yarn2, that runs in a separate service. If I wanted a second node service, for example, this comes in useful if you're dealing with data or schema migrations from an old system to a newer system where you need to have multiple versions of the same software running at the same time. So that's our build step, and you can have these like really complicated and complex build steps if you need it, including installing dependencies that are sort of system wide, any global packages, CLIs. We've previously used it to set up complex testing containers where you have dependencies on headless browsers and other tools. So it's really great for that. And then we have our networking and routing. And you may have noticed, if we go back to the site, our pretty URL is pasta-localdev-cms.lando-lndo.site. And technically that goes to a live site. So it hits a DNS that's configured to redirect to your local network, and they use this to help set up a lot of these pretty URLs, as well as some of the advanced functionality around certificates, so you can have HTTPS running on your local really easily, and among other things. And you can also use that to set up subdomains and different things. So from the documentation, they say they support nearly unlimited subdomains, wildcard domains, and you can have subdirectories per component, per container as well. So you can really it gives you the flexibility to completely recreate your production setup but on your local machine, which obviously helps with debugging and developing sometimes. In terms of the internal route, I do have a poorly made diagram trying to explain how it works. I'm just going to assume you're maybe not that familiar with Docker, but Docker has its own sort of network running on your system. And between those networks, they have different, in these boxes, essentially separate containers, images, built from images, running on different ports, maybe different host names, and you sort of want all of these to communicate to each other. And Lando just manages all of that for you. So from this whole complicated Docker network where you can have 5 memory 10 sites running at the same time, Lando simplifies all of that for you and exposes it in nice URLs. Now, in my proxy configuration here, I've defined a port, and I don't actually have to do that. So if I remove the port from here and just have this URL, I can still access it, but I would need to specify the port in my browser. So all this does is tell the proxy to route for that specific port as well. So I actually have the same URL pointing to different ports as well, if you ever wanted to do that. Then we have a local machine representation of how this might work. So you have your Docker/Lando network, and then you have your different clients and tools accessing that network and interfacing with it. And this consistency of how Lando manages the URLs and the ports for you really helps with configuring your database clients, API clients, debugging tools, because over time, as long as you have a consistent workflow, you can get more efficient at how you manage that, because you'll know how to deal with different issues as they arise. Right, so we're getting onto the custom tooling. It's worth noting that some recipes do come with their own custom commands. For example, the WordPress recipe comes with a specific set of commands to help you deal with WordPress's insane database management. So Lando does help you with some of those. But if you're doing a complete custom configuration, as we've done, you're going to want to have your own custom tooling. Otherwise, you won't be able to interface with the software that you've created. So that's why we have, under the tooling section, we have all these different services we may want to use, including Node, Yarn, PSQL. And for each of these, you can define the service. So that's which service mapped from here it maps to. So you can have complex setups with these commands. You can also just do completely custom commands like drop database, which will simply go into the database as user www.data and run a series of commands. And I'm pretty sure I've written it here. It can have a multi-service and sort of multi-service, multi-command. So with one Lando command, so like Lando build, you can run multiple commands in different containers at the same time. So this command here will run composer install in app server, yarn install, and then yarn sass in the node. Right, and then let's take a look at the front end. So here we have a front end pulling in that content, rendering it with some Next.js default styling, with the code being here. So all we're doing really is a fetch from our articles. We have the next API endpoint as a variable setup, and that's in my local environment file. If I were to push this project to production right now, all I would really need to do is change this URL to the production API URL, and you're ready to go and essentially have a one-to-one setup. There's not really much to show on the front end. It's just a simple static build. But hopefully it does make sense. And then we can add a custom image. And I feel like this is where it can sort of get interesting, because they acknowledge that they don't actually, there may be some things that they don't provide that you may need to set up. And we have a completely custom image setup that is actually quite complex. I'm just trying to think of the easiest way to break it down. But we defined it as a service, just like the node and the database services, except we're going to say the type is compose, and this is a special image type in well, they call them services in Lando. So it's a custom service type in the Lando documentation you can have a look at, and this then allows you to set up a custom image. We've used this in the past as well to set up our own custom node images wherever you might need a specific environment. So if your work is using a specific node image or a specific testing image, which is actually a common application of making your own custom images, then this is how you'd integrate it into your Lando site if you wanted to run headless tests, for example. So we're saying app mount false. That's because Docker, I believe Docker wants to mount, it tries to mount everything to /app, but we already use /app for our node. So we're saying actually don't mount it there. We're getting this image from get melee with a specific version. Then we're running a command. Then we're exposing some ports on this container. Then we're telling it to use this melee search volume, which we've defined here. And then we're just giving it some environment variables as a default setup. And these are specific to melee search, obviously. But obviously you can add your own things here. I should probably explain what some of these technologies are. So melee search is a search indexer. And if I just grab this URL. So it's a search indexer, much like Solr and Elasticsearch. It's quite brand new, so it lacks a couple of features. It's not quite on feature parity, but it is production ready for the majority of search needs. It's open source, and it's just really cool to work with. But we need an API key, so we're going to make a request to melee search. So melee search is actually mounted on, if I open this back, we've exposed this port, and then in our proxy configuration, we're saying for the melee search service, we want to expose it on this URL. So that's a subdomain of our site with this port. So we're accessing it here. And then in my Insomnia, I'm just going to get a private key, and you can sort of see your search indexing working here. And yeah, and then we're going to have this integrated into the front end using the same URL, except using a public key instead. So if we go back to this and then go to search, then this is getting our data from that URL. Again, similar to how you might have on a production server. Now, I know custom images can be quite complicated, so I don't want to spend too much time on this because for the majority of your needs, you don't actually have to use this. Lando supports plenty of popular services out of the box. So if you're just working in an agency that's primarily PHP or Node, chances are you won't even have to touch this, especially if you're doing simple sites. But let's get on to the, I've lost myself, into the architecture. Before you do that, actually, I just want to show the Lando info command. So you're probably going to need to use this quite a bit, especially early on as you're getting to grips with how the technology works. But Lando info is just going to show you a brief overview of everything that's running for your current service or current project even. So it's going to show us our node versions, any exposed or rather proxied URLs. It's going to show us our database connection information, which is actually something you can also customize in your Lambda configuration per database. It's going to show you internal connections as well for databases. and the internal connection is what you would use for services communicating with the same within the same project. So we have an exposed external connection. So if I wanted to connect to my Postgres database from my client, from pgadmin, I would use this connection here with this port and the same credentials, but my Strapi site is actually using the internal connection somewhere here. So it's defaulting back to a local database. So that's the internal mapping, internal port, and some Lando default. And this is actually another thing I found really useful for setting up your local projects with Lando. You can have all these essentially meaningless defaults for your projects, which makes it so much quicker to set up because you don't have to find any, you don't have to get any passwords, you don't have to mess around with connection details. I can just leave this in committed code and not worry about requiring anything for my environment file. But then, how would you actually use this? Again, I'm sorry about some of these diagrams. They're quite hard to make, to be fair. But on a monorepo project, you would have one Lando project. So this is what this GitHub repo is set up as. So you have everything, every service going into one big Lando project. It can span multiple folders, so it doesn't have to be in the same Git repo, but I do like to commit the Lando configuration just so we have it. But you can see how this setup could also match your server one-to-one. The default Lando services for PHP and I think most languages will come with Nginx as a service by default, so you don't have to specify that as a separate setup in your Lando. And yeah, then everything else just kind of matches to what you'd have on a server, Elasticsearch, Node, your database, maybe your PHP if you're running something like Laravel or Symfony. But then on our local, we can actually make life easier for ourselves by adding helper services like Mailhog. Mailhog essentially listens in on your SMTP connection and catches any emails that your app is trying to send. I found this really useful in debugging Laravel, Drupal, and WordPress sites in the past. Any email getting sent would be caught by a local, so you can actually handle that side of development as well. But then if you did have separate repos, you could also just as easily split them up, have separate projects, Lando projects running, and the overhead of having multiple Lando projects running at the same time, I wouldn't say is too much. If your computer can handle Docker, then it can handle Lando. But I also wouldn't say it's negligible just because of some of those overheads. Here we have a far more complicated cloud setup where we have a server running Nginx and PHP, which is then communicating with a cloud database service, which you might find in something like AWS, where you have different environments as well. And we can actually just connect straight from our local machine to those cloud environments. You don't actually have to do anything really. Like you can omit services you don't need. You can configure it to how you need it. And obviously we can just as easily recreate services. So Elasticsearch, sorry, you don't need to connect to a production one. All right, and then we're getting on to productivity. I'll just take a little sip. The consistency provided by Lando, and in retrospect, obviously Docker is something that helps the wider team of developers I you can expect it to always behave the same way. So if we have any issues with the code, we have any issues with the app, we can at least know that it's not specific to one person. Sometimes you have, like, for example, Node versions. There's different features supported between the same major version as well. So Node 14.0 is not the same as Node 15.0, 14.15.0. So this sort of specific configuration down to each individual project really helped us. Yeah, just like makes debugging so much easier. And if somebody's having an issue with it, it makes it, um, for me as like one of the senior developers, it makes it far easier to debug a problem because you don't have to worry about platform specific issues. And because Docker works on all platforms, more or less, with Mac OS and Windows struggling a bit, yeah, you can easily share your Lando project with anyone. They should be able to get up and running. And yeah, obviously shared problems, like I mentioned, um, any workflows that you do, any sort of nice things to have that you may, any tooling or utilities that you may have for your local development, you can share across your entire team, across all environments, and it should all just work. It doesn't always just work, but 99% of the time it does just work. At the very least, I don't have to spend and waste time with database imports, and configuration management. Testing is another thing that's been really nice to have automated inside Lando, or Docker in general, because you don't have to use Lando, obviously. Um, there was another thing. Right. Sometimes things just break and they stop working. And having a Dockerized slash Landoized configuration is really great because you can just completely destroy it and rebuild it back up. And that fixes like 50% of the problems. Um, and there's actually one thing that I forgot to mention in Lando is that they have DevOps integrations. So if you use any of these hosting platforms, I'm aware they're more popular with like the Drupal crowd, but if you use any of these platforms, Lando has been working with integrating the um, deployment and the local configuration and some of the database syncing and all of these things that usually take a bit of time, certainly time to set up for a wider team. They've been integrating these straight into a platform. So if you use Pantheon from your Lando local development, you can deploy your site, you can sync your database with the production one, and yeah, many other things. So if that's something that interests you, I recommend looking into that too. And it's really fast. For me on Linux, Lando is just really, really fast. Maybe I can show you, but I can do Lando display. I'm not updated. Right. And we can bring it back up. Um, and unless in that time it's destroyed your Node.js, your database, your Melee search, and it's brought them back up as well. So if any of these services and it had any bugs or issues with them, um, within about within a couple of minutes, you'll be back up and running, um, as if it was a fresh install. Which, if you've used a virtual machine before, that process takes significantly longer. The only catch with speed, obviously, is macOS and Windows. WSL2 should help with that, but macOS is just slower. I use Mac for work, and there's just no getting around it. And the last bit, so a quick recap, it's cross-platform. They're working on supporting ARM services. I don't know what that is, but it's worth checking if you're planning to use the M1. Anything major should just work. It supports many services out of the box, including PHP, Node, Python, and Go. Configuring a project, you can configure a project with built-in services as well as custom images if it doesn't meet your needs. We've seen how Lando manages the routing and networking. Hopefully, it's quite complex. Um, Hopefully, I've shared with you the benefits of having a shared local environment with all your team members, and looked over the DevOps integrations. Alternatives to Lando are DDev. Um, it only supports PHP, but it's significantly faster for macOS because I think they've integrated mutagen network syncing for the file system, or something fancy like that. But it only supports PHP, so it's really hard to use nowadays because you need Node. Toxel is similar to Lando, but from what I've seen, it supports less images or services. Docker Compose, honestly, if you can use Docker Compose, there's no reason for you to use Lando if it works for you. But if you want to quickly get set up on a local site, then I feel like Lando just has an edge on Docker Compose because of that. Vagrant, general VMs, these are probably never going to go away, but I'm never going to go back to them given how slow and frustrating they can be. When something stops working in a VM, it can take like half an hour to debug it sometimes. And obviously, like the next sort of direction that things are going in are remote development environments. I haven't actually used any of these. I'm just looking up what they are, and it seems like the sort of next logical direction the web is heading in. But yeah, it's worth having a look. It just feels like they're a bit early right now, so you don't really know what to use. Lastly, where you shouldn't use Lando, and that's in production. That's because the default services that Lando provides you come with certain configurations that make it unsuitable for production because they simply don't want to take that liability. It'll come with certain ports being exposed, certain utilities being installed, and certain setups of those internal services that you may not, they're just not meant for production servers. So you can't use this to Dockerize your deployment as well. Lastly, you have some useful links, Lando documentation, Lando installation steps, how to set up Lando with your WSL2. Then there's an article comparing some of these setups. So if you're using VirtualBox or Vagrant or whatever, you can have a look at different ways to set up all these things. And then a GitHub repo of the current project that this presentation is based on. And I think we, at the end, I don't know if we have any time for questions.
Hey, Paul, we do have a couple of questions for you. Your last few slides answered a lot of them. And you said if we run out of time, feel free to jump into the live discussion chat and answer them from your Discord account. First question is, can I use normal Docker commands to manipulate and debug Lando containers?
Yes, all Lando does is bring up those Docker containers for you and simplify that process.
All right. And then another question is, do I need to know Docker to work with Lando?
No, and that's the sort of major appeal of Lando, because while these configuration files look complicated, this is a fully custom configuration file made by a senior developer. If you're a junior coming onto this project, all I expect you to do is run Lando start, Lando yarn, and any command you need, and that's it. Like you shouldn't have to.
So if you had a developer who hadn't even used Docker or Docker Compose before, do you think this is what you'd onboard them with?
100%. Like I said before, I work in an agency, so working with freelancers as well to use various different technologies.
Mm-hmm.
This helps with all of that because I can point them to the Lando setup documentation, and then in a README file on the project, I just have 3 steps to get started on a local project.
Nice. That's great.
Then another question about kind of scope of project. Is there any time where using Lando doesn't make sense? So small, medium, large projects?
I don't think so. I've used it on fairly complex sites where, for example, one we've had was running two Drupal sites at the same time. So like a Drupal 9 and a Drupal 7, PHP 5 and PHP 8 running at the same time. So we can run data migrations and testing suites for that. And Lando has been perfect because it takes you, for something complex like that, it could take you like 10 minutes max to bring it up and get started.
All right. I think maybe a final question for Trist is, will there be value in me learning Docker before using Lando, or just jump straight in? And I think he kind of alluded to jumping straight in, but you can
jump straight in. There's always value in learning the fundamentals or whatever technology you're using. So I do recommend learning Docker at some point, because I think Lando can actually help with that, because it can simplify things and you can sort of take it as you need it with it.
All right, sounds great. Ron, you want to take over?
Yeah, well, thank you again, Paul, for being on here. Lando was definitely new to both Bibo and I, so it's great to find out, what alternatives there are, because we get so used to being complacent with the tooling that's out there that, has been, when we learn development, that's what we're told, use Docker Compose, off you go, and don't look back. But learning about what we can do better all the time is excellent, especially for productivity. That's exactly what this whole theme is about, and learning how we can spend less time doing the same things is excellent. Paul, he's on LinkedIn. Are there, if you want to check out more of him and his work?
Just give me a follow, something. I don't know.
Exactly. If you missed the talk, this will be recorded and go up on YouTube in the same link you're watching now. Paul, thank you again so much for showing us how to go through Lando. It's been really beneficial.
Thanks a lot for having me. And I'll be in the Discord chat answering any questions.
Wonderful. Thank you, Paul.
Thanks a lot. See you later.
Next up, we have our lightning speaker. This will be a shorter talk on productivity porn. If you've ever been on the journey yourself, you've installed, your to-do list apps, your note-taking apps, you read Atomic Habits, you've bought a Pomodoro tomato timer, you've been throughout the journey of all these things, all these advice and tips about what you should do to be working smarter. In fact, spend more time working on those productivity tips than being productive. This is the talk for you. Our lightning talk speaker has learned this the hard way, so others don't have to suffer the same fate. Please welcome Lila Papazian. Lila Papazian, rather.
Hi, everyone. That's well pronounced. Thanks.
Thank you.
So thank you for having me. I'm really excited about giving this conversation, this talk.
It's one that hits a lot of us right through to the heart, especially as developers.
Yes, I know the journey can be difficult, and tutorial hell, it's for every field, not only development. So I'm here to talk about productivity porn.
Yeah, I feel like we should have played some, 70s groovy music as we introduced you. Great title.
Yeah.
Why do you think? I know you're saying it affects all industries, but why do you think it's such a trap for developers in particular?
Because I'm a front-end developer, and the fact for us is that all the time there's some new tool, new framework, new something popping up. So we want to stay updated, and let's be real, we don't have so much time free. I have to work, I have to study, I have a house, I have a dog. So we want to learn things, we want to keep doing things. And when we start being overwhelmed about it, we start procrastinating. And then we fall prey for productivity porn, when we start like, oh, well, when I have this super cute or super functional Notion setup, I'm going to be so productive. And we fall for it. We all fall for it.
100%.
Can you please stop personally attacking me? I would appreciate it.
Yeah, I think this talk is going to resonate with a lot of the viewers.
I'm glad.
We'll let you take it away, Lila. Thank you very much.
Okay. Thank you. Okay. Well, we already spoiled the title, but I'm going to talk about productivity porn. What a fuck. I mean, it's something weird to be talking about. I'm going to start by defining what are we talking about when we talk about productivity porn. If you search for this term in Google, I mean, the search is going to yield at least 5 pages or more, because it's Google, of results and hundreds or thousands of articles. When we all talk about, yeah, we want to be more productive, but here's productivity porn, and this is a trap. I mean, it's true. So if we want to, be aware of if we are following the productivity porn, some common signs to identify these are unrealistic demands and unrealistic results, and it can also appear a guru-like persona, but it's not always the case. It doesn't look so complex, right? I mean, the signs are easy to spot, so why are we all falling for it? That includes me. Simply put, not only does it target wishful thinking, that is also a form of procrastination when we are stressed or bored or overwhelmed about some task or tasks. We don't do the thing. We just do every other thing we can think about it, and then it's, the dread is coming at you like an horror movie. And it's also related to the productivity cult that is always present in our society. I mean, we're conditioned to think that we need to stay best busy, and not only that we need to be productive all the time. Not only we must be productive in our jobs, but in our hobbies or free time. Even if we are learning something for ourselves, it must be productive. And we suffer from this. And if we fail to meet those unreasonable demands, it's very possible to start suffering the dreaded imposter syndrome. I mean, why does everyone else has their life together and I can't even start waking up at 5 a.m., meditate for half an hour, do a workout, and paint the entire house before I start working? I mean, the problem has to be me. And don't even get me started with the weekends. I can wake up at 7 a.m. on a Saturday already thinking about how much time I'm wasting by sleeping. So why, if reading all that, or in this case, hearing all this, shows really fast how insane that is, why do we keep falling prey to productivity porn? Because procrastination, wishful thinking, and the fact that being idle or having free time is often considered a sign of laziness. All these things really contributed to us feeling like productivity porn is the best thing for us. So with this in mind, if we need to be so productive all the time, when do we sleep? When do we make some time from, cooking, family, friends, the plants? Somehow prioritize our work, or at least to look busy enough for today's standards. And I know of very few people that finish their day and don't think 1 minute more about work. We already ranted about society and its cult-like approach to productivity. Let me rant some more. We let work become a huge part of identity, if not all of it. So naturally, we structure our days around that, and we try to fit sleep and other good things like, eating, spending time with our loved ones, and we try to fit it in the least amount of hours possible, because we want to work somehow 16 hours a day, because we want to be productive. And spoiler alert, we are not being productive, we are just looking busy. And of course, then we all have an endless supply of YouTube tutorials, YouTube videos, and podcasts, and other things that promise us they have a super fast, super easy solution for it. And it almost never works because it requires extreme lifestyle changes that don't even account for the fact that not everybody can do those. From handling the day-to-day basis, I would love to introduce you to this amazing comic. The key to leading a productive life is time management. Choose goals, build a schedule, and have the willpower to follow them. And let's look at the schedule. I mean, we can wake up at 7 a.m., use some time to boast about productivity in our blog, and then fool around the rest of the day. Even the next day. I mean, it says whenever. And this is kind of impossible. I mean, this kind of extreme lifestyle change, we need to be productive like for tomorrow. It's impossible. It's almost always impossible. And I'm saying almost because, yeah, there might exist some human person in some part of the earth that make it happen and is more productive for this, but it's not common. I mean, it's not common. It's like trying to play football like Cristiano Ronaldo every time you pick a ball. It's not going to happen. Just don't. And then we try to do it. We say that enough is enough. We're starting tomorrow. We're going to wake up every single day at 5 a.m. and study for 3 hours that new technology that just came in. And then we're going to work. Just like that. 5 a.m., 3 hours study and work. How many days can that last? I mean, 3? 5? We need to sleep. And then we end up defeated, ashamed of ourselves for not having the motivation or the willpower to make it happen. And let's end that cycle right now. That almost never works. So that YouTube video, that podcast that promises you can be, I don't know, a master at Docker, at Django, at Lando, at React, Angular, and Vue, yes, and amazing at your job while also being able to sleep, to have a loving relationship with your chosen family, being an excellent neighbor, and volunteering at the soup kitchen in just 1 week, they are lying to you. And after this kind of depressing reality check, let's talk about some solutions so I don't depress you all more. In this, I want to be clear. The way I handle day-to-day, it's really personal, and there's a mix of things that I tried. Some are backed by science, and some are exclusively personal experience. I'm not a self-help guru, so I don't have it all figured out. So I found that for me, it's easy to start tackling the day-to-day stuff before trying to do a massive overhaul of things. And we need to understand that life happens. We are not machines, and we need to be ready to accept our own limitations. I love running, for example. Am I good at it? No, I tore it easily. I'm the type of person that runs every day at 5 a.m., no matter what the weather is. Also, no, running is something I like, and I choose to be unproductive about it. I'm not running to run in a 5K marathon next week. I just like it, and don't arrow at me saying that it's not nice. I like it. I run about 2 days a week with some chill music and a relaxed pace, and it helps me exercise, but it's a time for connecting with my own mind. You know, it's a sweaty time, but it's time nonetheless. And I always found out that after a run, my head is clear, so I can come back to studying or learning or developing something. Then maybe I was blocked before to do it. So it works. It always works. I think when we choose to be unproductive about some things, we might choose to be flexible. I mean, when we came up with super structured plans with no leeway, I mean, time blocking and looking at you, if anything happens, and something will happen, our day and our routine falls apart. And when that happens, if we miss some part of the routine, the schedule we made for ourselves, it's very possible that we're not going to pick up in the next time block. We're just going to be angry and, oh, I hate life, something always happens, I can't do this. And being rigid, it's not going to work, and it's never going to work, because it's not sustainable if you're human. And if not that we are least lazy, entitled, weak, or whatever, it's that we're trying to stop a wave with a fork. It's never going to happen. So I already talked about a hobby of mine. So now let's talk about work. I work from home full-time since the start of the global pandemic, and I used to do it 1 day a week before that. I actually like starting with how to configure our physical space, because it's something that we can improve with very little. So let's start with defining a workspace properly. I mean, ideally, we all have a dedicated office in our houses with the best table, the best chair for, our bags, good lighting, 2 monitors, all the toys we want. But in reality, it's very possible that you're sharing your home with someone else who in turn might be working from home too. So what do we do with that when most of the people who talk about working from home are like, well, don't work in your bed, go work in your office, and then when you end working, close the door to your office, and that's that. I mean, it's not a luxury we all have access to. And even if I now have it, it wasn't the case always. I used to work from my bedroom, on the kitchen table, for example. And it's not that easy, if you're seated in a part of your house all day working, even if you shut down the computer, put away the cell phone, it's not easy to remove the mind from the work mindset, because we're always in the same spot. I mean, what's the difference between kitchen work and normal life kitchen? So I used to use some cloth that I have lying around to make like a big square that contained my laptop, my mouse, my keyboard, and all the related work things. When my work ended, I grabbed all that, put it in a cardboard box, and put the cloth on top. It wasn't fancy at all, but it was out of sight and out of mind. I usually do that with my digital space. I can bookmark lots of tutorials, have a to-do list with, well, watch this tutorial about Vue, watch this about Django, I don't know. And if I always have it there, like, oh, we're here, but you're never watching us, shame on you, it's not going to happen. It's going to make me feel bad about myself, but there's never an ending where I'm happy about it and watching it. I'm just going to ignore it until the end of time. And when we talk about the life-work balance, and I'm saying life on purpose in the first place, we need to talk about space. We need to know how to separate our life and our work to be able to stop working all the time. Our lives aren't our work. So when I stop working, I want a bit of fresh air, I want a bit of sun, if at all possible, some kind of activity that doesn't involve screens at all. But if that doesn't work for any reason, then I want to be able to, move my laptop to another table, be it the kitchen table or my bedroom, I don't know, and create a a different space for me to do another activity. And even if I want to be productive and watch all the things and learn all the things, I think it's really important to give it space to life. I mean, we want to be with our partners or significant others, with our family or friends, pets, the plants. I mean, all that needs some space in our lives. So we can be on our best shape, so we can, when we want to work, we are refreshed. I mean, we're not robots. So I have talked about some of my personal experience already, but I'm going to tell you some more because I'm sure you're all excited to know about it. So I think every developer is familiar with tutorial hell. You end up, oh, I'm sorry. End up watching some tutorials and then some more tutorials, and you don't accomplish anything at all. So I'm going to skip a bit so I can make it on time. So I really like this phrase from Einstein that says everything should be made as simple as possible, but not simpler. And I use that to recognize that I maybe want a system a bit more complex than paper, but I don't need to overload that with all the tools. I mean, I can use Google Keep and Google Calendar and a paper journal, but I don't also need a Jira tracker, Evernote notes, a second brain Notion. You get what I mean. And some clothing thoughts for me. There's no organizational system that is perfect out of the box for you. I mean, it can look really good, but it's very possible that you're going to need to adapt a bit of the system for your specific situation. Even, all the developers, every developer is a world on itself. So don't be afraid of getting something custom made for you. And the key point of productivity isn't looking busy, it's being mindfully productive. If you need to, deliver something tomorrow, is reading all your emails being productive, or is just looking busy? The last thing for me is our productivity levels may change, and our lives and our technologies and maybe even our work. So we must be flexible for things to really work for us and get out of productivity porn hell. Thank you very much. I don't know if we have some questions.
We have all of the questions.
Oh.
So,
okay.
Mark's just asked a question here. What tool or tools do you use to organize yourself?
Okay, I'm making a mix because obviously custom. I use paper to get the things that I need to do in the week. I use Notion to make a brain dump every 2 or 3 days, so I can write it all the things, categorize, and put dates if needed. And Google Calendar, so I know what things that, a doctor appointment, a specific thing at my job happening.
All right, wonderful. I like the statement that you made at the very end. Is reading emails productive or just looking busy? I think that's really important here. I think a lot of people get stuck in the busyness of it all and don't put their effort towards the productive, meaningful work.
We tend to pat ourselves on the back a bit too much with all the busy work.
Yeah, and I think it's definitely a cultural issue as well. You talked about kind of the productivity cult. I definitely buck that myself. So, but I digress into other questions here. So, let's see. Are there communities, like, for example, subreddits, for discussing anti-productivity porn or work-life balance ideas that you know of?
Yeah, I'm on Reddit all the time. and I'm not being productive, I'm staying busy. Some Reddits like disciplined, digital minimalism. I also look a lot of the Notion subreddit, but I think I'm going to do a search for my Reddit and paste the subreddits I think they are okay in the chat, the Discord chat, if you like.
Yes, that would save me a lot of hassle, so I appreciate
Yeah,
that.
don't worry.
All right, so our live discussion people, did you hear that? You'll be getting a nice list from Lila.
And you can check it. I'm going to make it a to-do list. Check this subreddit and this.
And maybe we can share kind of each other's kind of best tips and see if we can learn from one another. That would be a great exercise, I think, for people who are listening. Mm-hmm. You talked about physical space quite a bit. And so one of our users had mentioned one of their constraints. He said, I don't have a laptop to move around and I'm stuck at a desk with a tower PC. How does that user change their space when they use it for also like kind of their craft and creative space?
Well, what a question, but I also have a tower PC in my office. It's not for working, but when I used to do like everything in there, I will try to, I don't know, stop, tuck the keyboard at the side, put the mouse like far away to avoid the setup looking like I can sit and start. And something that is maybe more dumb, but I created, desks inside the computer, like, well, this background image for my screen, I'm losing all the words. Desktop screen, it's for my work, and this one is for me, or using, I don't know, Chrome for work and Firefox for personal.
Yeah. So it might be a little less about the digital space if you have to share those resources, but setting up a software environment that is different, that kind of tells your mind that you're in work mode or you're in fun mode.
Yeah, for me, it's more visual than anything else, but it maybe you love having one Docker container for all your work things and one Docker container for all your own projects. It's kind of up for us.
Well, I think that those are all the questions that we'll get to now. Again, pass it back to Ron to close us out.
That's right. Thank you again, Lila. Everyone, if you want to find out more about those lists or more of Lila's work, follow her on Twitter there. It's twitter.com/Lila Papazian. Once again, that really hit home for a lot of us. I'll repeat what Bibo said, that I felt personally attacked, especially when you ask, is 8 hours of sleep even possible, right? We're so addicted to being, we always think, we've got to sacrifice sleep if we want to, reach our goals and do all the things we want to. I think at the end of the day, we expect too much of ourselves and we expect too much of our schedules. So.
Yeah, and we don't even recognize we're most of the time trying our best. I mean, that's the trap.
100%, absolutely. Well, thank you for bringing that home for us and kind of slapping across the face. That's just what we needed. Again, everyone follow Lila on Twitter. And if you missed any of this talk, you'll see it recorded as well. Next week, we have 2 more talks. It'll be a talk from Strager, who will be talking about debugging JavaScript. And we'll have one from Devin Rowan, who will be talking about imposter syndrome. I know a lot of people are looking forward to those 2, so definitely stick around next week. It'll be 1 hour sooner than today's talk. It'll be 1 p.m. Eastern Standard Time or 6 p.m. UTC. All right, everyone. Thank you again for joining us this week. We'll see you in the next session. Thank you again, Lila.
Bye. Thank you.
I'll see you in live discussion.
See you there.